You're listening to the Neurocareers podcast with Dr. K, episode number 3.
This time we get updates from Italy and Spain. Dr. Elena Salillas, PhD, the expert on math cognition.
Hello.
Hello, Elena.
Hi.
Elena, can you tell our listeners what is math cognition about? What are you studying?
Well, math cognition is the area in cognitive science or cognitive neuroscience that studies how we process numbers in our brains, how we process numerical information, where in the brain those numerical processes occur. For example, if you have to tell me in which of my two hands I have more fingers, it's very easy to do. So this is a very basic component of numerical cognition. It has very specific location in the parietal lobe. We also study relation, how we process simple arithmetic, 2 plus 2 equals 4. These are very simple processes, but they can be also damaged in Dyscalculia.
Thank you very much, Elena. Do we all process math in the same way?
When you ask the scientists, they will tell you that this is how numbers are processed by everyone. The general goal of the cognitive scientists has been for ages to describe average group of participants to see what is common. We look for the generalization. One of my main goals is to know the situation in which those default systems for math or for language can be altered, to know how, if one of the areas in the brain that is essential for numbers is damaged, how we can cope with the same process in another ways. Because many times there are compensations mechanisms that allow behavior apparently similarly, but in different ways. As the process gets more complex and it implies other cognitive systems, such as working memory, such as other executive processes, then the strategies used by one person can be different than another's. If we get to more complex math, I'm to see how the particular patient can compensate those regular ways of doing math in another way. So if you see this patient, it could be completely behaving in math or in other processes, but he or she is doing things in another way, is managing information in the brain in another way. There are also specific cases in which dyscalculic children can compensate with time. Does it mean that they are doing things in the same way that a non-dyscalculic child? Possibly not. They do it in another way, but they do it.
Thank you very much, Elena. Processing time and numerical values, quantities. We always take those things for granted. We think that it's just given. But actually, as you are describing, there are complex systems in the brain that are supporting all those processes. You also mentioned children with dyscalculia. Can you tell more about what happens if there is some disruption in that process of the brain that supports functions related to math cognition? What can change?
Yeah. For example, we can distinguish between children with pure dyscalculia, in which discourse systems for math are damaged. We share discourse systems with monkeys, with preverbal babies. We could say they are essential from the beginning. When those systems get affected, we have the pure dyscalculia. Those children basically cannot face numerical processes almost at all. They cannot distinguish in which two sets of objects, which one is more numerous, for example. This pure dyscalculia is very rare, but it exists. Then there are other, what is called math learning disabilities, in which the system that can be impaired can be arithmetic. So they cannot retrieve arithmetic facts. For example, 2 times 2 times 3 equals 6. But they can contrast two sets of numerosities. So there are different systems. For children that I have tested, this many times is comorbid with dyslexia, a reading disorder, for example. Why? Because the arithmetic facts are very related with language. We learn them by verbally repeating the multiplication table. Or if this phonological system is altered, as can happen with dyslexia. Many times when you test a dyscalculic, and you can guess if he or she has dyslexia as well, that you have to evaluate, of course, but you can guess that this person can have also a reading disorder. Another math learning disabilities. These are arithmetic disabilities. They can do some math, but they cannot resolve this kind of simple arithmetic problems. Then also the numerical system needs of other systems, such as working memory, for example, or spatial memory or attention. In those cases, dyscalculia can be comorbid with ADHD, for example, with attention activity disorder. And in those cases, the basis is a more general domain deficit. Dyscalculia has to be very well diagnosed because even the mechanism of compensation can be different. So, for example, for a child that has no this numerical system, it's very difficult. That could be a possibility. That those areas that are devoted to kind of basic processing can be compensated. So they have to use a lot of other areas. But the problem comes from attention. Then you don't have to train math. Of course, you can train it as well, but you have to train also the general ability. So in a sense, the math learning disability are very, very broad. There are many processes that can be altered. These children, for example, can do comparison with non-symbolic material, but they cannot do comparison with symbolic material. So there are many components in dyscalculia. But the pure dyscalculia, broader sense, is equally frequent as dyslexia. The problem is that it's not very known. So not by scientists, by the educational systems. Dyslexia is very, very studied, very, very socially known, but dyscalculia is less known. So the ways of addressing dyscalculia are more difficult because of lack of knowledge by the professional that directly interacts with the children, such as teachers, etc. They know, of course, but it's much well documented. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it's a very broad disorder, and it has many components.
Yes, and you mentioned that when people presented with dyscalculia, during the process of compensating for the deficits, the brain basically starts to recruit the neural systems.
Yeah, exactly. In one way, you can go from more focal to more distributed. In other cases, when the problem exists, is more distributed. And the participant, when you train the children, then it becomes more focal. It's like they start to behave more normally. The diagnosis is essential. And this is why cognitive neuroscience is so important also at the diagnostic level.
Can you explain why the diagnosis of dyscalculia is important? This person might be complaining of dyslexia, might be suffering from ADHD. However, there can be underlying component of dyscalculia that we're not aware of. Is that true? And how understanding that can help the person to get better at all the processes that are not working well?
Yes, so if you don't describe exactly what processes are altered, where there is the problem, how can you do a training? What do you do? Train everything? Train only one thing because you think that if you train number comparison is going to be better? If you train only the mental number line, for example, the visuospatial processes is going to have a broad effect in the system? So this is it's important to know exactly where you have to training and to do the intervention.
Thank you very much. And of course, one of the questions that everybody usually is interested in, what makes a person good at math or not as good at math? Is this something that math cognition is trying to answer, or this is a different area of cognitive psychology?
Of course, there are studies in which they study expert math and they describe how they behave, etc. But to be good at math, for example, the factor that is very important and is avoid this very frequent math anxiety, in the sense that If children pay attention to numerical processes and their system is normal, there is not initial advantage in a specific. So if the attention is paid and there is no math anxiety and the brain is doing good, that dedicates enough time to learn materials, the children are going to be good. And of course, at the very end, it will depend when you are 25 years old or 30 years old, then it's going to be a difference. Of course, I know you are meaning about math genius. That is another specific story. But to be good at math or bad at math in general, in the normal population, it depends on the attention you pay to the specific material.
So attention here is one of the key factors.
Exactly. For example, there is a concept that boys are better than girls at math. There are people that study that, but there are people that say that it depends on other factors, other general cognitive factors. So it's not really true that girls are worse at math. Even though there are scientific studies that somehow have shown that there is better performance of boys than girls, also evidence in which they show how the conditioning factors that affect this difference, not the math system per se, but other systems.
That's good to know. So that notion that the girls are worse at math comparing with the boys seems not to be correct.
Exactly. You will find studies that show differences. The idea is why. There are scientific studies that show that the explainers are not gender, but other general cognitive factors.
Thank you. You also mentioned the math genius. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Any studies that really looked at the brains of math geniuses? And if so, what were the findings?
There are not many, but there are some. There are some studies that study genius. Yeah, I'm not very knowledgeable of those studies, but what I can say is that they are not the largest quantity of studies, because the majority of studies in math cognitions, and I guess that explains why there is not such profound those people, which is very interesting, is that the processes that are studied in math so far are very basic processes. So as I was telling you before, we study simple arithmetic, then we can study how you access numerical quantity formats. But as you see, this is a process that are very simple. Of course, you can study these processes in a genius, but very possibly the differences that you are going to find in these very simple processes are quantitative, not qualitative many times. So for that, we need a study higher complexity in math processes, I think.
Thank you. I think we covered the background of just the beginnings of math cognition, which is fascinating. And I hope that we will be able to learn more about it in our future episodes. Now my question to you is about becoming a cognitive scientist and choosing this particular area of math cognition. Many people are even not aware that we have specialized processes for math. And here you are becoming, first of all, a scientist and then specializing in math cognition. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it happened?
When I started the study of math cognition, my first training was on psycholinguistics, and I had the fortune to join a Marie Curie network that involved many people along Europe, and it was an excellent way to learn about this. I was in contact with very main laboratories in Europe that study this. And therefore, it was a very easy training, a very easygoing situation to acquire my background. One of the things that I was more attracted by number cognition is that, differently from the study of language, the input is very, very complex per se. In numerical processes, the ability in the studies is smaller, and you get very clear effects always. So it's trying to find such effects sometimes very, very strong effects. So perceive like there is much noise in the studies addressing number processing, that language processing. So, for example, if you study a sentence, for example, I study prosody, the intonation that you give to a sentence, you have to study even syntactic processes. You have to use material that implies sentences with very, very different contexts. So you need a lot of material. You need to extract what you want to study, that you are going to see how that works in the brain. But that carries a lot of information. So it carries semantic information, phonology, it carries prosody, carries many frequency of the words, etc. However, in numerical cognition, you can address straightforwardly the variable you want to address. That was something that was really appealing to me because the effects were very neat and very rewarding for a scientist to be able to take out the noise in the experiment, no? Because this is one of the problems that many of us had in the experiment. That is what was very appealing for me. I started in number cognition by chance, but I got really attracted by the relationships between space and numbers. For example, it was amazing for me how when you perceive a small number, you switch your attention to the left, and if you perceive a high number, you switch your attention to the right. There was a Nature paper that showed that. For me, it was, again, such a neat process, even behaviorally. So the mental number line, all those concepts were really interesting. And since then, I haven't left the area. This was in 2006, I think.
Thank you. That's, of course, an excellent motivation. And I just want to mention to our listeners that you have not only one PhD, you have actually two PhDs. And as you mentioned, one was in psycholinguistics. You study the ways that our brain processes language, and you're interested in bilingual processes.
Yeah, it's very long story. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think, we did a lot on that. Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to mention it to our listeners because it's definitely a fascinating area. We have people forming families from different cultures, speaking different languages, and of course their children often are bilingual. So how this affects the brain and learning and memory and in information processing in bilingual's brain. I think that would be a wonderful topic to cover in the future, and I'm sure that there will be many people interested in learning about that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and we did a lot on that, and there is still much to do, but it's very interesting also. Also, it's an area that we replicated many times. Yeah, initially the hypothesis was that one of the languages is more for math and depends on which was the language you use for the first time to study math. There are other people studying it, and there are angles on that and details, but we show that many times.
Was it so that first when you studied psycholinguistics, you learned about this possible association between math and language, and it prompted you to start studying already math cognition?
So I was studying math, and then I moved to do a postdoc in a bilingual society, so in a university within a bilingual society. At that moment, I was studying arithmetics, not in bilinguals before. So when I arrived there, I wanted to explore how this arithmetic processing that at the moment was the component of math that was more linked to language, how that was processed in bilinguals in each of the languages. One of the questions that we did to these people was in which language you learn math. And that was the beginning of the story, because that was one of the more explicative variables. But initially I moved, while I was doing numerical cognition, to a bilingual society. I was studying multiplication at that moment because before I was studying space and number relations. And then I moved to study multiplication and the specialization of each hemisphere for simple arithmetic. And then I moved to this bilingual society, and I thought it was very pertinent to apply those studies to bilinguals. And when you had to screen those participants according to different variables to control for things, one of the things that we asked was in which language did they learn math as a child? And that was the beginning of a long story, because after that we divided the results according to this variable, and we found that I will tell you in another day.
Yes, that would be wonderful. We will call that episode, In Which Language Do You Learn Class?
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Elena, just a personal question. Did you always know that you will be a scientist? Or as a child, you had some other thoughts? Or did you know from the very beginning that this is what you want? If not, what was at the beginning and how did you make the decision to become a scientist?
Well, in fact, if I tell you the truth, when I was a child and even during the university, I had a very difficult time to choose what it's strange and it's a bit nerd. But I really liked everything, and I had very good scores, grades for everything. So for me, I really enjoyed almost everything. I was more on science than on language. That is true. I tend to like more sciences. But then I like it also art. So it was everything a bit intermixed. Then when I moved to the university and I started psychology, because my initial formation is psychology, I had the same problem. I loved the degree. I loved every part of the degree except for one of the courses. But then I went to this class on artificial intelligence, and I was amazed at that moment in the 90s how you could train a neural network that was artificial to learn things. And I was really, really hypnotized by that idea. So at the same time that I was doing training in clinical psychology, as I tell you, I was always divided. At the same time, I started to collaborate thanks to a grant from the ministry with a department in the deployability of a neural network language. So that was my beginning. I first was in language, then I moved to math, and then I mixed them two. But as a scientist, the flow took me. I didn't decide, but I just appeared to be one, and I really love what I do. Mm-hmm. I always love it. Even being from 98, having done a lot of research, until very recently, I didn't start to call myself a scientist. I don't know why. It's just that I like to do what I do. I love it. I love to know things that nobody else knows. I like science by its creativity component. I think is amazing for that you can imagine and you can get into things, get into concepts that nobody else has wondered about. That for me is really, really rewarding. And that's a scientist. I just like what I do, I don't care if I'm a scientist or just an artist sometimes, I feel,
Yes, it looks like from what you were saying, you found the art in being a scientist.
Exactly, yeah. In fact, I started really be creative in science when I start to dance. When I start doing contemporary dance, then I realized that I became so much creative in science. And then it was the moment that I felt that I could create, and I could do my own thing. I departed from helping others doing things like many PhD students start doing to create my own ideas, to improvise dancing. It took me to be creative in science as well.
Yeah. And I think that separation between really art and science, it's
not so bad. It's not so far. No, it's true.
It's more of a modern already time concept because before, if you look at ancient times, the art and science, they were united. Actually, they were helping.
Yeah. In fact, I think it's a very good topic for you. There are many projects dealing with art and science, specific projects doing that. Many people do that as well. Of course, there is the aesthetics, etc. But I mean the very process of the scientists do whatever they do, even if it whatever scientist. I think the creative part makes the difference between a person that, of course, you can be very high, methodologically very good, but not being creative, and you are fundamental for science as well. I think there is then the others that have the ideas, conceptual advances. One essential part of science is the methodological. In our case, the way you study the brain. the precision in which you study at the time, at the temporal, at the spatial level, for example. This is crucial, and being knowledgeable on that is very crucial. And there are some people that are crucial for that. Fortunately, in my case, I departed to being much more creative and then, of course, knowing how to do things, of course. But now I think I have both things. I can test my ideas with many techniques, and that is very, very rewarding. So on the one side, you have the technical part, which is essential, but you also need the conceptual advantage. So it doesn't matter if you show me a brain that is connected if you don't have an interpretation for that, a functional interpretation, there is no sense for doing that. And that is good, and that is why teamwork is essential in science. But of course, these two components cannot be separated.
Yes, I agree. And the importance of conceptual design driving the need for methodology. So the more concepts we have, the more ideas we develop, the more technology we would need.
Exactly. Yeah. Of course, ideas are also in the technical level. I mean, it's evident. Of course, there are ideas at many levels. But in the study of psychology and the cognitive system of the mind, the brain, I think is very important the theoretical approach you give to things, being able to disengage from what everybody does and do something different in the way of you approach to the brain, I think is very important. This is my approach. Okay, this is what there is. What do you want to do, or what do you want to head to? What is missing here, but at the global level, not at the micro? This is my approach.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. I want to emphasize now for possible graduate students or students who are going to graduate school, this approach of being curious. So what you were saying that, yes, you didn't know what exactly you will be doing, but you were just going with your curiosity into the discoveries of what is possible.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I mean, for people who doesn't know what to do, of course, the parents and the family is going to tell you, okay, you are going to earn more money if you do this or you do the other. But if you don't have the inner drive to do something, it's very difficult with a degree that, I don't know, related to economics or some other areas. You are going to be wealthy in a way. Of course, scientists don't do this for money at all. Nobody. But the family are going to take you to the area that is going to assure your future. But if you don't have the inner drive and the inner curiosity for a concept that you want to follow, first, you are going to be very unhappy. And second, possibly even being practical is not going to work, I think.
What do you think are possible ways to develop that inner drive and curiosity? Is it asking questions about the world? What would it be?
A friend of mine says that when you read an article, when you read a paper, there are questions that comes to your mind always. And there are a second experiment that you would love to do after that. What I mean is that when you really pay attention to something, you pay attention to an area in your degree, the more deep you go, I mean, it's a question of time. Nothing is going to be put in your door. The door opens by itself, I think. Once you focus and you really go deep into while you are studying, of course. And then it comes because you really need you really see the need in society for that. And then you can take that path. There is no other way. It's studying and questioning things.
So you mentioned paying attention, studying and questioning.
Finding the meaning, I mean, it's not memorizing. Trying to use what you are studying to do something new. Not only memorize to pass an exam. So just find the meaning of the why and the what for of everything you study. There are people who study how the frequency of words impacts the electrical activity in your brain, for example. If you think, what is this for? Why can you spend hours and hours and hours doing that? Okay, then you, Milena, know very well that when you have a patient in which language has to be evaluated, we need those words that someone else that doesn't do anything else did to apply to the patients. Everything has an objective. I don't think nowadays science has been made with an ultimate goal.
Thank you very much, Elena. I think it's very important to talk about challenges that you are facing being a scientist from psychological perspective. It might be stress, it might be anxiety, it might be even burnout. I noticed that many of my friends mention that, but they don't see possibilities of coping with that. And some people are simply quitting their jobs or stop being productive because of those issues. And of course, we know that there are many things that we need to do, and we work very long hours. So we have our work in our head all the time.
Yeah, that's the problem. Of course, you can do many other things. And the way I'm doing it is by keep on schedule. Of course, it's not good to be working all the day with no time limits. This can get you crazy. But if you have habit, you establish an habit, you get not extremely early, but not late, and get to work until lunch, and then have a lunch break, and then don't watch many times the news because you will be crying all day. Then after lunch, work a bit more, and then relax in the evening. If you are with your family or you put a movie, a really good movie, you can listen to music at home if you are at home while you are working. I mean, there are advantages for this, I think. And of course, during the weekend, one day, I try not to do absolutely anything. You have to keep both things, the resting and the schedule for work, I think.
I want to summarize what you said, that strategies for you are to stay on schedule, to plan your activities, find the ways to execute what is possible. Of course, give yourself also time to relax and to recover from work.
Of course, it's very important also to socialize through social media, your family, your friends, your colleagues. Keep in touch with your colleagues because there are things that has to be discussed. And also very important, do exercise. I think even in 2 square meters, try to do some exercise. Now, internet is plenty of sites that give you many places that would be really unaffordable if you do it in presence, but they are opening, they training, and this is a great opportunity to do very nice exercising.
We know also that exercise affects the way our brain works, affects our emotional state.
Exactly. And as a dancer friend of mine says, movement makes you feel free. A bit of mindfulness, of course, but movement is the best thing we have, controlling the mind.
So physical exercise can help us control the mind. You mentioned mindfulness. In our series, we want to emphasize the effect of mindfulness training as well. Maybe you can say something that you are doing, maybe quick meditations.
No, I have the really that one of my favorite dancing teachers, who is a friend of mine, is now streaming. So I can follow. It was a former teacher of mine that is really good. And it's a kind of meditation, but also with the exercise. So you get stretching, you get a bit of cardio, etc. And I'm doing that, yeah. Also, you don't need to be all the day, like if you were in a marathon, but with 30 minutes a day, and even people that cannot do many movements, they can stretch. For example, there are simple stretching that you can do. Breathing with a good music. Music is essential, at least for us. I mean, it depends on the other people find freedom in reading fantasy, reading. I prefer to motion, of course, I read as well. Where I find really freedom is in movement. If you close your eyes and you move, your body thinks, even if you run in the still, if you run still, your body thinks you are moving.
So we basically can control our mind by this mental exercise. Yes,
exactly.
Ourselves somewhere exercise. Here is the power of our mind and our brain.
And in our lives, I think.
You also mentioned focusing on what is important and on what we want to focus. So it's again managing our mind, choosing our thoughts on purpose. Yes?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I think it's also important for all of us to have that future perspective. We need to keep our minds on the future. What do we want the future to be? What do we want to accomplish? It also comes to those goals that you are keeping in your blue notebook. That's why I want to ask you about your future plans. What are your future plans with your amazing research that you are doing? What you want to accomplish?
So I continue with the studies with the patients and see that reorganization that occurs for math in math processes. And then continue with doing some work on cognitive testing in awake brain surgery for language, math, and many processes.
Thank you, Elena. That's wonderful plans, and I really wish you implement all of them. I also wanted to ask you about your overreaching goal with all your studies, everything you are doing. After many years of this work, what would you like to see? What is that ultimate goal that you want to accomplish?
Well, there are people that has been even more than me, of course, so I'm kind of junior in this. What I try to do now is applying what I have learned, and not only what I have learned, but the way I can learn new things to help in clinical aspects in the health system for the study of the brain. I really enjoy that part because I think you not only learn with time to things, concepts and theories and information, but you know also how to generally acquire new knowledge and to very quickly generate new ways of testing things. And I want to apply this speed I have in that sense and the knowledge that I have acquired with years to help in the health system and also in developmental disorders, etc. Basically, I'm trying to go that direction now. Yeah.
Thank you. For all listeners who might want to learn more about mass cognition, where would you refer them? Maybe there is something that you would recommend to read. I know that also you published a chapter in the book Oxford University.
Exactly. I have it here. The Oxford Handbook of Numerical Cognition by Cadolson and Doker. This is one of the handbooks on the topic. There is also a chapter on numerical cognition instead of numerical cognition, Handbook of Mathematical Cognition by Campbell, which is a bit older. We have the chapter here in the Oxford Handbook with Carlo Semenza, my long-term colleague. There are many, but I think books are good. Mm-hmm. It's good because they synthesize at a certain moment of time what's going on in the area. Mm-hmm. But they should be taken always as a departure for further searching. And everything, if you are a student, everything is in the library and in the journals. This is a way to pick up paths that you can take for research or even for if you are in the clinical system. A way of having a perspective of what is going on. But then from there, of course, you have to depart to more specific studies. And there is plenty of things in the network that you can see in journals. There is a journal of mathematical cognition, specific of mathematical cognition, but the papers go in many journals, in Frontiers, many places, Science, Nature, of course, Neuron, many places of cognitive neuroscience that you only have to search for the keywords and you get all the information you need. I think I prefer journals than books, but of course books is good to have a synthesis at a certain point of time on what things are.
Elena, if some of the undergraduate students are listening to you, the students that are just getting on the path of possibly becoming scientists, what would be your recommendation to get familiar with this field as just first primary source? Where would you refer them?
If it is in this numerical cognition, of course, this manual would be great, the Oxford Library of Psychology. You can get it online. From that, just pick up 2-3 topics and search yourself. My advice is always read trying to create, not be encyclopedic if you want to be a scientist. Of course, it's very important to have the information in your mind and to have a structure of what's going on. And you at the end get expert in an area, in some topics, and know about others. But you will get expert in certain topics. The more you do, the more you will learn, of course. And the junior you get, and then the senior you get, you know more. Of course, there are different approaches, and there are people that like to know absolutely every that is in the literature. But then, of course, be very precise and very strict with information. but try from what is known to be creative always. Make that effort, make that jump from what you read.
Yes, that creativity definitely is present in everything that you're saying.
That's my approach. But there are many and all very essential and very important to exist. But that is my approach.
That is very important. I appreciate you sharing that. Another question is if somebody wants to learn more about what you are doing or have questions, or maybe even there are scientists that are listening to this podcast and they want to establish some collaboration with you. What is the best way to connect with you?
Send me an email. You can give my email in the podcast if you want. Just contact me and tell me about exactly what do you want to do or what are you interested in. And if we find a common area, I'm happy to do things. And even a student that wants to do some thesis or something, I'm perfectly fine with that. I enjoy supervising people. So yeah, we have normally, it's quite effective. And then I wanted to tell something else more about people who wants to dedicate to research. I always say that it's very important to know about different areas, not restricting. I was telling before that people spend many time studying the frequency of work. Okay, this is a valuable approach, and it's necessary, etc. But my personal view is that for things to advance, you have to be able to relate different areas in psychology, not only one. It's good to pick information not only in your restricted area. If you are a numerical cognition scientist, not being restricted to the literature to numerical cognition. So, for example, also reading about language, reading about attention, trying to do things and jumping from one area to the other. To be able to innovate, number cognition requires to look at other areas as well.
Practicing that approach of expanding your knowledge, but then again restricting it afterwards in your area.
Bring things from other areas, yeah.
That is very important. Thank you so much, Elena. And maybe you can just mention your email in this podcast.
Yeah, it's salillas@gmail.com. This is the one you always will reach me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that there will be students and other people who might reach you and ask you more questions.
Looking for one.
If you would say just one sentence to all our listeners, what would that
be? Be creative and do things.
Thank you. I would like to say that what you heard today is only a beginning. You saw that there are so many other areas that you can learn about. And actually, another area is testing mass cognition during brain surgery. I really hope, Elena, that you will be able to tell us more about this.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, this is what as you know, I'm very interested now. Yeah, I think this is a real good application for doing well.
Absolutely. This and other topics will be covered in our future podcast series. So everybody, please stay tuned. Now I want to thank our guest, Dr. Elena Salillas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope this idea of yours, of this podcast, gets really, really nice. I think it's a great idea and you have all my support and admiration for this.
Thank you so much. And thank you for agreeing to do that. That was fun. That was wonderful. And I'm sure it has its impact. So
okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks to you.
Thank you, Elena.
Bye bye.